Welcome to the history section.
This podcast will analyze the lasting and extensive influence of Scandinavian settlement, specifically Danish and Norwegian presence, on the geography, language, commerce, and maritime culture of England.
We'll be focusing primarily on the Northern and Midland districts and examining the evidence we have. This ranges from linguistic place names and trade routes all the way to, well, profound developments in naval technology.
And the most direct, I'd say undeniable evidence of this settlement is really encoded in the landscape itself. When we look at the place names of England, we're essentially looking at an enduring linguistic map of colonization.
The research indicates a pretty distinct, a geographically localized shift in the way places were named as you move from the south into the North and Midlands.
Right. For centuries, the southern regions kept their place names, which were predominantly derived from Anglo-Saxon terms. That attests to that primary influence.
These are the familiar suffixes we all know, things like sattun, which means an enclosure or village.
Or arm for a homestead, Derryborough for a fortress or town.
And, of course, Numberforth or Summerford for a river crossing.
Exactly. And these Anglo-Saxon markers, they really dominate the South. But as we travel north, particularly starting around the Thames estuary and then accelerating west of the Wash, the introduction of Old Northern terms signals a very clear demographic boundary.
And these Scandinavian linguistic markers, they intensified dramatically in the Midland and Northern counties. I mean, we're moving far beyond evidence of just raids or some kind of temporary occupation.
They are. We're looking at evidence of complete demographic replacement and really establishment.
The sheer scale of this renaming exercise is, I think, essential for understanding the intensity of the settlement.
It is. To put it in quantifiable terms, the concentration in certain areas is profound. Lincolnshire, for example, it still has nearly 300 place names of verifiable Scandinavian origin.
And Yorkshire, which was the historical heartland of the Danelaw, boasts over 400.
Even the more rugged and mountainous regions like Westmoreland and Cumberland, they each have about 150 Scandinavian names. This volume suggests that the settlers weren't merely conquering.
No, they were establishing permanent, widespread communities. Communities that necessitated entirely new names rooted in their own language.
So when we do a detailed analysis of these core place name endings, the most decisive indicator of Danish settlement is the suffix by.
Right, derived from the Old Northern term by.
Exactly. And the term initially just meant a single farmstead or an estate, but its usage evolved over time to signify a village or a town.
And crucially, the presence of that by ending acts as a kind of unambiguous boundary marker for the heart of the Danelaw.
It does. It's found almost exclusively north of the ancient administrative road, Watlinga Strait.
This renaming was comprehensive. I mean, it often overwrote significant Anglo-Saxon sites. If you consider the city of Derby a really crucial location in the Midlands.
Its original Saxon name was Northworthig.
And the Danes just completely supplanted this identity,
Right.
renaming it Dirably or Diraby, which translates to the town of deer. And that Danish name is what ultimately survived into modern English.
Another powerful example is the former Saxon monastery and settlement of Streenchalk in Yorkshire.
Which was renamed Hvidby, or the White Town, known today as Whitby.
These examples don't just show coexistence. They show a linguistic and cultural dominance that fundamentally changed the regional identity.
So the geographical distribution of these by names, it provides a kind of quantitative map of the Danish settlement focus.
It does. Out of an estimated 1,370 identifiable Scandinavian names across England, over 600 end in Wedby.
And the greatest density is consistently found in those counties positioned directly across the North Sea from the Jutland Peninsula.
The Danish homeland. Lincolnshire alone has 212 by names. Leicestershire records 66, and the North Riding of Yorkshire has 100. This highly concentrated distribution provides strong evidence of planned and sustained colonization efforts originating primarily from Denmark.
And it is important to remember that we're talking about two distinct, though related, groups of settlers, the Danes and the Norwegians.
Yes, and while Old Danish and Old Norwegian were similar languages, distinct morphological differences exist. The form byr or bye-bye is essentially Danish.
Whereas in Norway, the corresponding form typically ends in bear or bow.
Right, and this subtle yet critical linguistic distinction is corroborated by later historical documents, notably the Domesday Book, which was commissioned by William the Conqueror in 1086.
And it consistently records these settlements using the by or by ending.
Which just reinforces the attribution of these heavily settled midland areas as being fundamentally Danish in their foundation.
So moving past that dominant Brubai marker, the second most common Scandinavian place name ending would be thorpe.
Yes, from the Old Northern thorpe. This term signifies a secondary settlement, often a collection of houses separated from a principal estate or simply a smaller village.
And we find about 280 instances of thorpe across England.
These settlements often acted as offshoots from the larger Brebai towns, which indicates a pattern of continued organic expansion once the primary Danish centers were established.
Examples of these thorpe names often indicate simple orientation or function. Something like Norththorpe, the North Village, or Millthrop, the Mill Village.
And interestingly, the suffix is sometimes compounded with ownership identifiers, like Bishopsthorpe or Nunthorpe.
Which signals that these newly established Scandinavian settlements were founded on or right next to lands already claimed by the church or religious orders.
It demonstrates a kind of integration into the existing ecclesiastical property structure.
The third key linguistic marker is a thwaite, which comes from the Old Scandinavian thwaite or tithe.
And this term specifically denotes an isolated piece of land or a clearing, typically one carved out of woodland or scrub.
So the distribution of thwaite names is geographically distinct. We find them, names like Brackenthwaite, appearing far more frequently in the mountainous northern regions rather than the flatter Midlands.
Which reflects an environmental adaptation. The settlers in the north were forced to establish farms by clearing difficult terrain, a necessity that was less frequent in the open rolling landscapes preferred by the Danes.
It's really the analysis of these place names by their meaning, beyond just the suffixes, that illuminates the daily lives and the priorities of the Scandinavian settlers.
Absolutely. We can classify these clear linguistic remnants into several robust categories based on what the names describe.
We find many names descriptive of location or nature. These are foundational identifiers.
Names like Eastby and Westerby denote orientation. Mickleby comes from the Danish Magleby, translating to the large village, and Newby is, well, the new village.
The term toft, meaning the long field, appears frequently, as in Langtoft.
And other names describe geological or vegetative features. Stainsby, the stone village, Asquith, meaning ashwood, and Lund, which is just the Danish term for a grove or a small wood.
These names give us a remarkably detailed picture of the natural environment the settlers encountered or even created.
Risby, for instance, means the beach village, while names like Thornby and Birkby refer to thorn and birch trees, respectively.
It suggests a very close relationship between the community's identity and the local ecology it relied on.
And the names also offer insight into the early economic activities and the fauna of the Danelaw. Names derived from animals are very common, reflecting the importance of livestock and hunting.
So you see Cowdale, derived from Cowdale, Swinedale, or Swinethorpe.
Hestholm, the Horseholm, Calthorpe, and Hairby. It's almost like a livestock inventory written onto the map.
Beyond agriculture, there's also evidence of specialized trades and commerce embedded in names like Smithby or Smithby.
And Weaverthorpe and Cotmanthorpe, which is from Cujoban's Thorpe, meaning merchant's thorpe.
The existence of villages explicitly named after smiths, weavers, or merchants strongly suggests that these were settlements founded by individuals specializing in a craft or trade.
It highlights the sophistication of their local economy.
But perhaps the most numerous group are the names derived from personal conquerors or original settlers.
These patronymic names. They were likely bestowed by the subsequent community and were derived from the first Scandinavian who claimed or established the settlement.
And the sheer volume of these names indicates that settlement was often driven by individual land claims and the initiatives of numerous powerful individuals, not just by large, centrally planned military expeditions.
The examples are numerous. Rollsby, named after Rolf, Ormsby after Gorm, Hickenby, Gunnerby, Thorsby.
And the persistence of these names centuries later speaks to the enduring respect or memory attached to that founding individual.
Furthermore, many of these place names, Thorsby, Ashby, Crosby, Doby, Selby, Thorpe, they later became hereditary family names.
Which demonstrates an enduring sociological legacy that extends far beyond simple geography and into modern British identity.
And the classification of these place names extends crucially into the spiritual and administrative memory of the settlers. We find memorials of the early pagan belief system embedded right into the topography, which is quite fascinating.
Names like Tursdale point clearly to the deity Thor.
Baldersby to Balder, Fraithorpe to Friar, and Ullersthorpe to Uller.
Now, it is certainly plausible that these names were derived from men who were just named after the old gods.
But the ancient Scandinavians also had a clear custom of naming towns and estates directly after their deities.
And this suggestion of sacred sites is strengthened by the appearance of names like Asgardby and Aesgarth, potentially relating to Asgard, the realm of the gods.
Even more specific are Wydale and Wigthorpe, which derive from Ve, signifying a sacred or holy place. This echoes ancient Scandinavian religious geography, mirroring the name of the chief ancient sacrificial town in Jutland, Viborg, or Vibjorg.
And perhaps the most direct parallel is Uppsal in Yorkshire, a name drawn from Uppsalir, meaning the high halls, which was the name of a major sacrificial site in the Scandinavian north.
These remnants of paganism provide a crucial pre-conversion context. They contrast with the subsequent appearance of Christian-aligned place names.
Like Bishopsthorpe, Nunthorpe, Kirkby, Crosby, and Crosthwaite.
Exactly. And the appearance of these Christian names sufficiently proves that Christian institutions succeeded the pagan ones, establishing churches and crosses on the very ground where heathen altars and temples had previously stood.
So this shift in toponymy marks the final religious integration of the settlers into the broader European Christian framework.
And moving from the spiritual domain to the civic, the administrative and judicial structures implemented by the Northmen are also preserved in the place name record.
The central feature of this governance being the thing, or assizes, a formal legal assembly.
The village of Thingwall in Cheshire is a direct memorial to this system. Its location is highly strategic, situated on a small tongue of land between the mouths of the Dee and Mersey rivers.
And it's surrounded by a cluster of other villages with Scandinavian names.
This strategic placement suggests that the area served as a centralized, accessible location for regional legal proceedings and governance.
This practice mirrors the judicial structure of the settlers' homeland. In Iceland, for instance, the chief ancient place for assizes was called Thingvalla.
Right. So the establishment of Thingwall in England suggests a deliberate transfer of a specific governance model, emphasizing community law and open assembly from Scandinavia to the conquered districts.
We also find place names derived from the social hierarchy, such as Coningsby, Conisthorpe, and Kingthorpe, which designate property belonging to the kings, establishing royal domains.
And the linguistic record also indicates the diverse composition of the settlements beyond just Danes and Norwegians. We find place names derived from the origin or descent of other inhabitants who joined or lived alongside the Scandinavians.
Names like Romanby, Saxby, Flemingsby, Franksby, Frisby, Scottby, and Ireby.
And most significantly, we have Normanby and Danby, or Denby. The name Normanby, village of the Northmen, occurs frequently and is often interpreted as evidence of Norwegians settling in areas already largely populated by Danes, or vice versa.
It reinforces the mixed, though predominantly Scandinavian, descent of the population.
This abundance, estimated at about 1,500 clearly recognizable Scandinavian appellations, are almost exclusively concentrated in the districts to the north and east of Jutland Strait.
Which is the primary piece of evidence demonstrating that the Scandinavian presence was one of extensive permanent settlement, not merely military occupation.
Furthermore, the specific choice of place name morphology can help us differentiate between the primary areas of Danish and Norwegian influence. It links settlement preference directly to the landscape of their homelands.
So in the flatter Midland counties of England, we predominantly find names ending in the familiar Danish forms. By, thorpe, toft, beck for a stream, naes for a promontory, and e for an isle.
And this reflects the geography of Denmark itself.
But as we move farther north into the more mountainous, rugged districts, these Danish terminations gradually give way to others, notably thwaite, and more distinctly, those we associate with Norwegian influence.
Ones like Dale, Force, Tarn, Fell, and Hof.
And while Old Danish and Old Norwegian were mutually intelligible, these specific morphological differences allow us to reasonably suppose that the latter group of names are of distinctly Norwegian origin.
It reflects a conscious choice of territory that mirrored their homeland.
We see this most clearly with the term Edale for valley, appearing in names like Kirkdale, Langdale, and Wasdale.
Even more evocative is the presence of Force, meaning a waterfall, like Aesgarth Force in Yorkshire, or High Force and Low Force in the River Tees. These terms are derived from features common in the steep, glaciated topography of Norway.
And the term fell, derived from the Old Norwegian fral, signifies a rocky mountain or plateau, as seen in Mikkelfell and Crossfell.
Similarly, Tarn, from Tjorn or Charn, means a small lake, and these names are found exclusively in the most northern counties, specifically the Lake District.
Finally, Hof, meaning a hill or mound, appears in places like Redhaw and Kirkhaw, predominantly in Northumberland and closer to the Scotic border.
These forms, Dale, Force, fell, tarn, there are still common elements in the geographical vocabulary of Norway, but are much less frequent or even absent in the flat country of Denmark.
This linguistic alignment strongly supports historical accounts, suggesting that Norwegians immigrated in substantial numbers and actively sought out the northern and mountainous districts precisely because the terrain and climate physically resembled their own homeland.
Right, and the frequent recurrence of the name Normanby throughout the region further confirms the presence of these Norsemen.
Conversely, we can confidently attribute the vast majority of Scandinavian place names in the Midland counties to Danish origin.
The termination by is essentially Danish and is absent in areas of Scotland and Ireland which were conquered by Norwegians. This geographic boundary in England is remarkably rigid.
With the isolated exception of one Kirkby in Kent, names ending in U-by are just not found south of Watlinga Strait.
And the evidence from the Domesday Book, favoring the Danish by or by forms, further solidifies the dominant Danish influence across the central and eastern Danelaw counties.
So the survival of roughly 1,500 recognizable Scandinavian names across 8 centuries, it completely refutes any historical argument suggesting that the Danish-Norwegian population north of Watlinga Strait was entirely expelled or assimilated after the Danish dominion ended in 1042.
Exactly. Had that been the case, the place names would have reverted to or been replaced by Anglo-Saxon or Norman forms. Instead, this powerful linguistic record confirms that Danes and Norwegians continue to reside in large numbers.
And consequently, a substantial portion of the population in the Midland and Northern counties traces its origin directly to these Northmen settlers.
So, if linguistics provides us with the where and who of the settlement, we can now turn to the economic sphere. Let's call it the commercial revolution, trade and the Northman merchant, to understand the why and how of their lasting influence.
And it's crucial to dispel that simplistic notion that the Northmen who traveled abroad were purely Vikings focused on raiding and conquest.
Many were quite explicitly peaceful merchants. Scandinavia's remote geographical location meant that foreign merchants were often reluctant to make the dangerous voyages north.
As a consequence, Scandinavian tribes were almost compelled to become the primary seafarers, thereby establishing themselves as the essential conduit linking the northern markets, rich in timber, furs, certain minerals, with the southern European markets.
In Scandinavian society, the merchant profession was not only profitable, but highly honorable. While trading voyages were perhaps not as glamorized as Viking expeditions, established legal and customary systems were in place specifically for the protection of merchant vessels and their goods.
So this societal respect for trade meant that the profession was open to and practiced by many, including chiefs of royal descent.
Right, and this cultural valuation facilitated the development of major trading centers and large annual fairs across the north, which were complex logistical and commercial hubs.
We know that commercial intercourse between England and Scandinavia, particularly the Jutland and Limfjord districts, was not new. It had existed even during the Roman occupation of Britain.
But this trade increased dramatically after the Jutes, Angles, and Saxons settled England, and it really exploded when the Danes and Norwegians established their permanent settlements.
By the late 9th and early 10th century, a very brisk trade existed between the Danelaw and the Scandinavian kingdoms.
The economic integration was so deep that Scandinavian rulers began coining money in North England. The renaming of the crucial Saxon city of North Worthig to Derby exemplifies not only linguistic change, but also its economic importance.
The Danish rulers of the time clearly saw Derby as a major minting center.
So much so that even the Saxon kings were compelled to acknowledge this economic reality. King Athelstan, between 924 and 940, and his successors adopted the foreign Danish name Derby on their own coins.
That's a remarkable historical marker. It shows that the influence of the Scandinavian settlers was so wide extended and economically dominant that it dictated the formal currency nomenclature, even in interior parts of the country governed by Anglo-Saxon monarchs.
And recognizing the imperative of maritime commerce, Anglo-Saxon leaders did make efforts to foster it. King Alfred the Great, around AD 900, sponsored exploratory voyages.
Notably those of Ulstein and the Norwegian otter.
Exactly, with the express aim of advancing commerce and gaining strategic knowledge of the Baltic and the Norwegian coast.
The legal codes of the time also formalized the importance of mercantile enterprise. An Anglo-Saxon merchant could obtain the high title of thane, or chief, if they successfully crossed the sea 3 times in their own ship.
Which underscores the strategic value of long-distance trade.
Nevertheless, during the period of intense Viking and Norman expeditions, the trade with Scandinavia largely remained the exclusive domain of Scandinavian merchants from Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Iceland.
And this was a consequence of the overwhelming naval force the Northmen commanded at sea, which rendered voyages too perilous for Anglo-Saxons. Wherever the Northmen established settlements, their merchants followed immediately, ensuring a steady, secure commercial connection with their home territories.
This continuity resulted in significant Scandinavian merchant communities settling in virtually all the major English trading centers: London, Southwark, Derby, Grimsby, York, and Whitby.
In London, the Danes became a powerful faction, possessing their own churches, designated markets, and independent courts of law. Their influence was so formidable that they played a decisive role in local politics.
Even affecting the election of figures like King Harold Harefoot. Old historical accounts attest to the considerable number and commercial strength of these Danish mercantile groups.
A vital and often underappreciated aspect of this Northman trade was its connectivity to the remote East. The Scandinavian vessels brought not only northern commodities but also merchandise and wealth from distant Asian sources.
The Northmen had maintained connections with Eastern countries since their earlier migrations, connections that deepened significantly with the Byzantine Empire and Constantinople by the 5th and 6th centuries, leading to the circulation of Roman coins and valuables throughout the north.
And following the Scandinavian colonization of Russia, particularly with the establishment of Novgorod, a regular commercial route was opened that linked Constantinople with the Baltic.
But the connectivity to Asia was far more expansive. Before the discovery of the sea passage to the East Indies, the principal commercial road connecting Arabia and the Caspian Sea to the Baltic ran directly through Russia.
This route utilized major river systems, like the Volga, to transport goods and wealth northwards. And this transuranian trade route was intensely active from the 8th through the 11th century until internal disturbances in Asia and political revolutions in Russia and Scandinavia disrupted it.
The sheer scale of this trade is physically documented by the discovery of vast quantities of Arabian silver coins dug up across Scandinavia and Russia.
And to illustrate this scale, in Stockholm alone, over 20,000 pieces of Arabian silver have been preserved, many of them coined by the Samanitic caliphs, whose issues accounted for 5/6 of all discovered pieces.
These hoards prove that Scandinavia, especially the islands of Gotland, Uland, and Bornholm, served as the principal commercial depot for Arabian merchandise destined for the North Atlantic.
It made cities like Visby and Gotland commercially essential global hubs for the time.
And this trade had a massive financial impact on England. Silver, which was scarce in the north until the 9th and 10th centuries, appears to have arrived precisely via this Asian-Russian route.
Alongside the coin currency, a large quantity of unique silver ornaments, rings, and other articles, frequently found broken or twisted, have been discovered. This suggests they were treated as bullion or commodity currency, cut and weighed for transactions.
This phenomenon ties directly to Britain. Oriental or Arabian coins, often accompanied by these distinct silver rings and ornaments found in Scandinavian hoards, have also been unearthed in England and Ireland.
The most famous discovery being the Curdale hoard. And crucially, these Oriental items are often found in conjunction with the coins of contemporary Danish-Norwegian kings and jarls, providing strong, undeniable evidence that the Northmen were the agents who transported this immense wealth of silver across to the British Isles.
This sudden, significant influx of precious metal provides the most probable explanation for the surprising number of silver coins subsequently minted by Anglo-Saxon kings.
Right. Before this period, there was a pronounced scarcity of silver in Britain, dating back to the Roman withdrawal. It's highly probable that this surge of silver arrived in both England and Scandinavia simultaneously, sourced from Asia via the Russian river networks, and distributed efficiently through Scandinavian commerce.
The enduring economic legacy is also solidified in the vocabulary retained in English.
Terms relating to currency, measurement, and commerce were borrowed directly from the Scandinavian languages, such as march and ora.
These terms derive from the Scandinavian mark and ore, representing standardized weights and values used in their trading networks.
And these terminological markers highlight the deep level of integration achieved by the Scandinavian commercial practices within the English economic system.
It must be noted, however, that the flourishing trade attested by the abundance of Anglo-Saxon coins found in Gotland, which indicated brisk, uninterrupted commerce until the Norman conquest, decreased significantly after 1100.
And that decline was a direct consequence of the hostile relations that emerged between the Norman descendants and the Scandinavian kings who continued to claim the English crown. This political friction effectively interrupted the smooth commercial connection that had defined the previous 2 centuries.
Which brings us to our next section, the maritime inheritance. From longships to global exploration. This focuses on what may be the Northmen's most profound and long-lasting contribution to the British Isles, a deep, practical mastery of open ocean navigation.
To properly frame this achievement, we really must first compare the contemporary seafaring capabilities. The ancient Britons and Celts were categorically not a seafaring people in the modern sense.
Their navigation was restricted to short coasting voyages, using small, frail boats, constructed essentially from interwoven branches covered with animal hides.
They exhibited a long-standing disinclination for maritime life, preferring to settle in remote inland or mountain tracts, neglecting even the rich fisheries on the west coast of Scotland and Ireland.
Which is a fact that's difficult to comprehend given their occasional experiences with famine.
Then you have the Anglo-Saxons, who, despite their continental origins, were also primarily land-focused. While they incorporated seafaring groups like the Jupes, Angles, and Frisians, the dominant Saxon temperament favored life ashore.
And their development of deep-sea navigation was slow. This deficiency was clearly demonstrated by the feeble resistance they initially offered to the Danish incursions.
So much so that even when King Alfred the Great attempted to address this by building a new war fleet, he was obliged to man his ships partly with Frisians. That indicates a clear domestic lack of highly skilled seamen.
His efforts did little to fundamentally alter Anglo-Saxon seamanship expertise.
And even in the Mediterranean world, maritime progress was limited by geography and vessel design. The Greeks and Romans restricted their navigation primarily to coasting trips or voyages across the contained Mediterranean Sea.
Their ships just weren't built for the wide, stormy conditions of the Atlantic Ocean. A voyage beyond the Straits of Gibraltar was considered an extraordinary exploit.
And regular, reliable voyages to the British Isles from the Roman core were scarcely commonplace. It was reserved for the Scandinavian North, a civilization bordered by and intimately familiar with the Atlantic, to build the first large, true, seagoing ships.
These vessels were capable of navigating the open, stormy ocean with reliability. Unlike others who feared the weather, history tells us the Northmen viewed the storm only as a welcome friend, as it accelerated their passage.
This mastery required advanced calculation, extensive practical experience, and a superior talent for steering safely through heavy weather and breakers.
This foundational achievement, the creation of reliable blue-water vessels, was revolutionary. By providing the basis for modern navigation and extending the potential reach of commercial and military intercourse across vast oceans, the Scandinavian advancement in shipbuilding fundamentally altered the global landscape of trade and exploration.
And even before the major conquests of England, the Northmen possessed sophisticated ships. The Norwegians, due to the extreme distances of their colonization efforts, were constantly crossing the Atlantic to the Shetland Isles, Iceland, and Greenland.
Their warships were termed longships or dragons, often distinguished by elaborate gilded carvings of powerful creatures like dragons, vultures, or lions on the stems, symbolizing their power and speed.
A prime example of this naval prowess is the renowned Norwegian king Olaf Tryggvason's vessel, Ormenhin Lange, or the Long Snake, which achieved a legendary status.
The ships of the Danish conquerors, like those used by Sven and Canute, were equally magnificent. They boasted prows adorned with glittering images, sails embroidered with gold, ropes dyed purple, and masts tipped with gilded birds.
This was naval technology fused with striking cultural symbolism. And while few physical images of the early Scandinavian vessels survive, the Bayeux Tapestry, documenting the Norman conquest of 1066, provides crucial contemporary visual evidence.
And the Norman ships depicted on the tapestry align perfectly with the contemporary Danish and Norwegian designs.
This alignment confirms the clear transmission of superior shipbuilding technology. When the Normans conquered Normandy, they inherited and subsequently refined this advanced naval technology from their Scandinavian predecessors.
They found no adequate models in the rudimentary vessels of the local Franks and Bretons.
No, and their continued connection with the Scandinavian fatherlands, maintained through the Danes and Norwegians who had settled in England, ensured they received continuous improvements in ship form and arrangement, resulting from the Northmen's extensive, uninterrupted voyages to Iceland and Greenland.
This influence is preserved in the linguistic record of maritime affairs. A range of Scandinavian terms for ships, parts of ships, and naval personnel passed directly into the Romance languages and subsequently into English.
For example, flot, meaning fleet, derives from the Danish flayed. Verek, meaning wreck, comes from vrag, and the term mast is borrowed.
Even professional terms such as esterman, derived from the Danish styrman, meaning steersman, demonstrate the depth and specificity of this technical transfer across cultures.
Consequently, the art of shipbuilding and seamanship necessarily developed in a similar manner in England, particularly concentrated along the eastern and northwestern coasts, where the descendants of the Vikings had settled closest to the sea and major navigable rivers.
And although the advent of Christianity and political stabilization brought an end to the Viking raiding life, the intrinsic maritime spirit did not vanish.
The Scandinavian colonists were unable to entirely abandon the customs of their ancestors who joyfully rode on the backs of the waves. For many of these descendants, a seafaring life remained a deep-seated necessity, ensuring they continued to practice, refine, and transmit their skills in British waters.
Contributing a critical infusion of maritime capability into the overall population.
And this inherent skill proved vital for global explorations centuries later. The Norwegians, thanks to their mastery of the open ocean, demonstrably reached the continent of America several times.
The ability of the Northmen to navigate the extremely dangerous ice-bound seas around Greenland and successfully maintain considerable colonies there, traces of which survive today as runic inscriptions and ruins, serves as absolute proof of their exceptionally advanced navigational prowess.
It's confirmed that the North American mainland was first discovered by people who were sometimes driven by storms far to the west of their intended course. For a people capable of continuous open ocean navigation without instruments like the magnetic compass, it would have been highly improbable had they not been occasionally driven by weather to the neighboring coast.
This continuous, systematic practice of open ocean travel laid the essential technological and psychological groundwork for England's later maritime supremacy.
During the Middle Ages, English maritime affairs maintained lively intercourse with the distant Scandinavian republics of Iceland and Greenland, especially through the active ports of Hull and Bristol.
When these republics fell under Norwegian control in the 13th century, free trade was restricted. However, the trade that the Northmen carried on with Iceland gradually and often illegally transferred to the English during the 15th century, frequently guided by their Scandinavian kin who had settled in Britain.
And these regular English voyages to Iceland fostered a profound and increasing familiarity with extensive open ocean travel in the harsh North Atlantic environment. This prolonged training period sets the context for later global ambitions.
It's plausible that Christopher Columbus, during a stay in English harbors such as Hull or Bristol-known centers for Iceland, trade-heard detailed accounts of the ancient Northmen voyages to Greenland and America directly from Iceland navigators.
And while definitive historical proof of Columbus's awareness of the specific sagas is lacking, the information would have circulated within those maritime communities. Hearing of the Norsemen's previous success in traversing the Atlantic would certainly have reinforced his opinion that a vast unknown continent lay to the west across the great ocean.
This crucial transfer of knowledge and maritime expertise helped to cultivate and sustain the daring Viking spirit inherited by the English from their Scandinavian forefathers.
And this spirit was ultimately indispensable. When the New World was rediscovered, the same temperament, characterized by loftiness, daring, and a contempt of danger, was strongly displayed among the English people.
Equipped with greater experience, improved navigational instruments, and superior means, the English seamen entered the Age of Discovery with undaunted courage. They not only became proficient on the ocean routes pioneered by their Scandinavian ancestors, but successfully opened routes to new lands across previously unknown seas.
This established the maritime supremacy that became one of the most important foundations of England's wealth and power for centuries to come. Our mission in this examination is a detailed analysis of the sustained and pervasive impact of Scandinavian settlers, specifically Danes and Norwegians, on the political, ecclesiastical, and legal structures of England. We're tracing this influence from the initial Viking incursions in the 9th century right through the subsequent Norman conquest of 1066.
And we're relying heavily on the considerable quantity of letters and diplomas collected by J.M. Kemble, which documents the period from approximately 600 to 1066. The research indicates an earlier and far more profound Danish influence than is conventionally recognized.
Right. We want to begin with a focus on the early footing these Scandinavian settlers established, particularly looking at their ecclesiastical presence. The traditional narrative often centers the discussion of, permanent Danish settlement around the peace treaty with Alfred the Great. But the available data suggests significant integration occurred well before that.
A compelling argument can be made that Danes were settling in England as Christians and occupying influential positions within the church hierarchy even before that key treaty between Alfred the Great and the Viking King Gudrun in 879.
And that's critical. It moves the timeline of deep integration back by decades, placing it more than 150 years prior to the centralized Danish rule under Canute the Great.
So how did that happen? What was the mechanism for this early integration?
Well, the foundational process was the christening of Danish individuals while they were abroad. These baptisms took place primarily in Germany and in England itself. This practice was instrumental in the subsequent introduction of Christianity into the Scandinavian North.
So England was a kind of early hub for that religious contact.
It was. The baptism of the Jutland king, Harold Clog, serves as a prime example of this. He traveled to the mainland and, along with his entire suite, was baptized during a stay with Emperor Ludwig at Ingelheim in 826.
And these overseas conversions provided a ready-made structure of Christian Danish leaders who could then settle in England and immediately participate in established Anglo-Saxon ecclesiastical life.
Exactly. They could effectively bypass the long, slow conversion process that often followed a military conquest.
So to really grasp the extent of this, there's a localized but highly illustrative example we can look at. Croyland Abbey in Lincolnshire.
Yes. Croyland, located close to the Wash. Its geographical position on an island protected by vast morasses made it both a secure location and a critical nexus for documenting these patterns of early Danish integration into the local power structure.
And the historical records of Croyland, its chronicles, were compiled later, in the 11th century. But while some sections are treated with caution, the personal and place names listed in the 9th century sections are considered highly reliable.
They are. And what we find there is evidence of undeniably Danish or Scandinavian names among the convent's leadership well before the 879 treaty. Specifically, we see clerical figures like Abbot Sivard, a priest named Tursten, and a monk, Eskil, holding high positions within the convent hierarchy.
So their early presence suggests two things. First, Danes were settling permanently. And second, a significant number of them must have already been Christian upon arrival or converted very rapidly to ascend to these clerical roles.
It's more than just tolerance. It indicates active integration and trust.
This ecclesiastical presence is also confirmed by the place names, the toponymy. The early occurrence of place names like Kirkeby, which literally translates from Old Norse as village with a church, strongly suggests established Christian Danish settlement.
And governance. It suggests governance in the area around the Wash long before 879. The settlers weren't just pagan raiders passing through, they were creating permanent, religiously defined communities.
And what about the secular side, the benefactors of the abbey?
Well, the deeds and charters dating from 800 to 868, they provide evidence of a secular Danish aristocracy already in place. These deeds list figures in Lincolnshire like the Viscounts Thorold Norman and Sivard.
So these individuals, along with others like Grimketil and Ascatellis, who was a cook to the Mercian king Wiglaf, they held titles and possessed the wealth necessary to be benefactors to a major monastic center.
Right. And the titles they held, particularly Viscount, indicate that they were established local leaders and had successfully integrated into the existing Anglo-Saxon administrative structure. The Danish place names in these deeds, like Langtoft and Holbeck, just reinforce that this structure was operational before any formal peace agreement.
What's particularly complex here is that this established Christian Danish community then became a target for a fresh wave of Norse-Danish forces.
Exactly. The devastating Viking raids of 867, led by King Asketil, were carried out by heathen Scandinavians who showed very little discrimination toward Christians, whether they were Anglo-Saxon or of Danish descent. Croyland was devastated.
Yet, even amidst this violence, the continuity of the Scandinavian presence is striking, isn't it? History tells us that many of the monks who were killed and those who survived the massacre bore distinctly Danish names.
Yes. Among the slain were Prior Asker and the friars, Grimketil and Amund. And among those who were saved was a monk named Svend. This points to a deeply embedded community where both the victims and the survivors of this heathen assault were of Scandinavian origin.
And after the destruction.
After the destruction, the rebuilding and subsequent governance of these crucial monastic centers were entrusted to Danes. A Dane named Tursten took on the vital task of rebuilding the Abbey of Ely. And for Croyland itself, a man of Danish family, Turketel or Thorketel, ensured its restoration and governed it successfully as abbot until 975.
Thorketel's personal history is a fantastic illustration of this cultural blending. Before taking his vows, he was a powerful warrior and statesman.
He was. He previously served as chancellor to several kings, and even distinguished himself militarily by commanding the citizens of London in King Athelstane's army at the famous Battle of Brunanburg.
The transition of such a high-profile military and political leader into the abbacy of a key religious house really demonstrates the fluidity of roles available to these influential Danish figures.
And Croyland's leadership succession further illustrates this pattern. From the 9th through the 12th centuries, the abbey had a remarkable number of abbots of Danish origin. Following Sivard and Thorketel, we see two of Thorketel's relatives named Egelric, then Seidel, and later Ulfketel in 1053.
So this deep entrenched succession suggests that Croyland wasn't just a passive recipient of Danish settlers, it was more like a distinctively Danish convent.
A principal center for the civilization and Christian cultivation of Scandinavian immigrants in England.
Yes. And this political significance of Croyland didn't wane, even after the Norman conquest. After 1066, the swampy districts around the abbey became a place of refuge for both Danes and Anglo-Saxons resisting the Normans.
Right. Jarl Velthiof, the son of the famous Danish Jarl Sigvard Digri of Northumbria, he became a key figure in this resistance movement and a major benefactor of the abbey.
He eventually submitted to William the Conqueror, but was later executed.
He was. And the enduring political and cultural significance of Croyland is highlighted by the fact that Abbot Ulfketel and his monks successfully obtained permission to transport Valthiof's body back to the abbey. There, he became a local martyr. The site of his burial became associated with supposed miracles,
which generated deep hostility from the Normans, leading to severe retaliation against the convent, including the deposition of Abbot Ulfketel himself.
So this incident reveals the continuous, politically potent role of this Danish center well into the post-conquest era.
Moving beyond Croyland, the broader ecclesiastical power structures in the mid-10th century show a pervasive Danish influence across the north.
Absolutely. In Northumbria, King Guthred, who was the son of Hardicanute, extended the bishopric of Durham around 890, conferring rights and liberties upon the see that distinguished it, even in later legal settlements.
And by the year 940, Christianity had firmly established itself among the Northumbrian Danes. This is dramatically illustrated by the political machinations of the era.
It is. During the wars waged by the Anglo-Saxon King Edmund against the Danish King Anlaf, or Olaf, Archbishop Wulfstan of York actively sided with the Danes against the Anglo-Saxons.
He even negotiated a peace settlement that resulted in the cession of the country east of Watlinga Strait to Olaf. This demonstrates a clear division of loyalty.
It does. The highest church leader in the north was prioritizing the political interests of the Danish population over the unity of the English kingdom.
And to compound this, we have to consider the concurrent status of the highest church official in the south, the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Odo, who held the see during this same period, and was also of Danish descent. He was the son of a Viking warrior who had once fought against Alfred the Great. He rose from humble origins and eventually became the primary spiritual leader of England.
So this leads to a striking historical realignment. Half a century before the reign of Canute the Great, the two chief ecclesiastics in England, the Archbishops of Canterbury and York, were both of Danish extraction.
Yes, Odo in Canterbury and Oscitel, or Oscitel in York. Their presence signifies that the highest political and spiritual power was, to a great extent, controlled by the descendants of the very people who had been raiding the coasts less than a century prior.
And this lineage continued, didn't it?
It did. Oscitel, who served as Archbishop of York between 955 and 970, was succeeded by his nephew Oswald, who was also the son of Odo's brother. This traces a direct, continuous lineage of ecclesiastical authority back to prominent Viking families.
And Oswald's influence was such that he published laws specific to the Northumbrian clergy.
Yes, and those laws are highly revealing. The fines stipulated within them were computed, according to Danish custom, in marks and ore, deliberately distinct from the Anglo-Saxon calculation in pounds and shillings.
Which clearly suggests a substantial body of Danish clergy whose legal and economic practices were so pervasive that the church structure itself had to accommodate Scandinavian legal customs.
Exactly. And this English-Danish clergy also played a crucial external role. The priests and missionaries with Scandinavian names like Eskild, Grimkild, and Sigurd who later went from England to Scandinavia to convert the remaining heathens, were clearly natals of the Danish part of England.
So this rapid accession of Danes to the highest ecclesiastical offices underscores a crucial distinction. The Viking raiders were temporary, the Danish colonists were permanent.
And some settlers understood that to secure their political and social position, they needed to deeply integrate to the highly influential clerical order, ensuring institutional continuity for their descendants.
By the time of Canute the Great, the English clergy had thoroughly mixed with Danish elements.
A fact reflected in the numerous Scandinavian names found signing royal letters patent: Abbot Osidal, Bishop Grimketil, and Diaconus Thurkel. Even under Edward the Confessor, high church dignitaries with Scandinavian names persisted, confirming the lasting penetration of the church. The church was not merely influenced by the Danes, it was, in key regions, run by them.
Now that we have examined how the Danes captured the pulpits, we need to understand how they captured the castles and the administrative structure. Let's look at the secular aristocracy.
The royal letters and diplomas utilized for this research reveal that just as Danes achieved high church office, they also gained admission into the ranks of the nobility and even the immediate court and council of Anglo-Saxon kings.
And this political ascension occurred through two primary mechanisms. First, through military service and court favor, and second, because certain districts became so thoroughly occupied by Danish settlers that when the Anglo-Saxon monarchs reasserted dominion, they were compelled to incorporate these existing Danish chiefs.
Ignoring them would have meant continuous rebellion. The Danish kings Halfdan and Gudrun had already initiated this structural change by establishing a resident Danish aristocracy. They divided the conquered districts in Northumbria and East Anglia among their principal followers.
This created an early, powerful, and wealthy base of Danish landowners who had a vested interest in the stability of their new holdings.
And we saw a snapshot of this with Croyland. As early as the 9th century, Lincolnshire already had at least 3 shire reeves, the chief administrative officers of Scandinavian extraction: Thorold, Norman, and Sivard. These were not mere placeholders. They were men exercising real executive power.
So for a time, the Danish possessions northeast of what Linguistrate operated as semi-independent kingdoms. But as the Anglo-Saxon kings began to acquire dominion over the Danelaw, these Danish chiefs didn't just disappear.
No, they entered the orbit of the Anglo-Saxon court. The court of King Athelstan between 925 and 941 provides crystal clear documentary evidence of this blending. Diplomas from this period show numerous Danish-Norwegian chiefs signing documents alongside the king.
Confirming their attendance at the royal council, the Witnagemot, we see the signatures of Jarls Erm, Gudrun, Healden, and Ringwald. Their presence as signatories confirms their status not just as local potentates, but as recognized members of the English kingdom's political class.
And this is corroborated by historical accounts suggesting Athelstan utilized Scandinavian warriors extensively in his armies. You have the presence of the famous Icelandic bard Egil Skallagrimsson at court, for example.
Right. This integration continued robustly through the mid-10th century. Diplomas from the reigns of Edmund and Edred showed jarls like Gunnar and Skull and thanes such as Thurketel regularly signing letters patent.
And we also notice a fascinating linguistic shift. The Anglo-Saxon title of dux often varied alternately with the Scandinavian title of jarl, which the Anglo-Saxons called orl. This interchange confirms that the roles were essentially synonymous in terms of high rank and authority.
Then we come to the reign of King Edgar, from 959 to 975, which is widely recognized as a favorable epoch for Danish influence.
Very much so. Edgar was educated among the Danes in East Anglia, and he developed a clear partiality for them, leading to accusations from some Anglo-Saxon chroniclers that he showed excessive favor to these so-called foreigners.
And his court reflected this. As we said, the 2 highest ecclesiastics were Danish, and his council included secular chiefs like Jarl Aseidel and thanes such as Ulfketil and Rold.
Thord, the son of Jarl Gunnar, was recognized as one of Edgar's most trusted chiefs, demonstrated the reliance of the West Saxon monarchy on men of Scandinavian descent for the stability of the entire kingdom.
The influence of the Danish aristocracy had become so deeply rooted that even when King Ethelred II was later faced with invasions by Danish kings and was eventually forced to flee, he could not eliminate Danish chiefs from his entourage.
No, he couldn't. His royal suite continued to include figures like Jarl Nordman and thanes, such as Ulfketil and Sivard, confirming that powerful figures with Scandinavian names maintained high office. Removing them would have instantly fractured what was left of his kingdom.
And on top of that, you have royal intermarriage cementing this political connection. Ethelred's first wife, Elfleda, was the daughter of the influential Danish chief Third.
And their son was the legendary Edmund Ironsides. This single fact underscores the extent to which Danish families had successfully engrafted themselves onto the very royal line of Wessex, making the struggle for the throne a deeply familial blended conflict.
Even the notorious St. Brice's Day massacre in 1002 proved insufficient to eliminate this influence.
It didn't effectively reach North England, which was dominated by Danish power structures. Even afterward, Scandinavian names persisted among high-ranking figures. A powerful Dane named Ulf Kettle Snelling, the sheriff in East Anglia, was even married to Ethelred's daughter, Ulfhilde. The family ties remained strong.
So the conquest by Canute the Great in 1016 wasn't just an external invasion. It was more like the final, formal institutionalization of Danish political supremacy that had been growing organically for over a century.
That's a good way to put it. Canute reorganized the English kingdom entirely, dividing it into 4 great earldoms, or jarladomer. Wessex, the historical heartland, Canute reserved for himself. Mercia went to Edric Strahan.
And crucially, the distinctly Danish districts of Northumbria and East Anglia were placed under the control of celebrated Scandinavian military leaders.
Yes, Northumbria went to the Norwegian Jarl Erik, and East Anglia was assigned to the Danish Jarl Thorkild the Tall. This division solidified Scandinavian control over the areas of highest Danish settlement.
And naturally, Canute's royal court was dominated by celebrated Scandinavian figures.
Completely. Diplomas from this era show signatures from powerful jarls, including Thorkild, Uric, and Ulf, who was Canute's own brother-in-law. Their dominance cemented the shift of power from Anglo-Saxon to Danish elites.
Beyond the landed aristocracy, Canute created a highly distinct and loyal military caste. He substantially increased the number of his Scandinavian bodyguards, the huskarl or thingmen.
Yes, and this force was designed to be separate from the English population. It was governed by a unique system of law called the Witherlagsretten,
Which established exceptionally strict regulations regarding conduct and discipline, effectively creating an elite, self-governing military order.
It did. And this highly disciplined force provided a firm support base for the king, ensuring his stability and the enforcement of his decrees throughout the kingdom.
This political blending was so thorough that it even influenced how property was exchanged. Cultural artifacts confirmed the dominance of Scandinavian customs, particularly in land conveyance in the north.
Right. The famous example of Ulf's horn, which is preserved in York Cathedral, is a perfect illustration. This was a powerful Dane, Ulf, gifting significant property to the cathedral. Instead of a written deed, he used a carved horn as the title deed, a clear reflection of Scandinavian conveyance methods.
And the power of the Danish chieftainry didn't immediately collapse after Canute's death in 1035. Under the subsequent reigns of Harald Harefoot and Hardcanute, this power grew even further.
Exemplified by the celebrated Danish Jarl Siward Digre of Northumberland, who gained his title in 1040. Siward was immensely influential, controlling vast swaths of northern England.
So while the subjugation by the Danes led to instances of humiliation for some Anglo-Saxons, Canute's long-term policy was strategically geared toward amalgamation.
It was. By consistently transferring fiefs and posts to his Scandinavian followers, the political identity of the Anglo-Saxon nobility was gradually eroded. By the time of Edward the Confessor, the remaining Anglo-Saxon nobility was, by imperceptible degrees, becoming more than half Danish in lineage and practice.
Which proves that the Danish political presence was deep, resilient, and virtually ineradicable, setting the stage for the next layer of enduring influence, the legal and administrative structures.
We move now to the legal framework. This is perhaps where the Scandinavian spirit left its most permanent administrative and legal mark on the subsequent history of England.
It's an incontrovertible historical fact that for centuries, about half of England, the area known as the Danelag, was subject to Danish laws. And these Danish laws, or Danelov, remained in force and continued to color the subsequent common law even after the Norman conquest.
The foundational distinction between English and Danish law was formalized very early. The treaty between King Alfred and Gudrun established a clear difference in jurisprudence, especially regarding fines. For Danes, penalties for law infringement, known as loslet, were calculated and paid in marks and ore.
The Scandinavian currency system.
Right. In stark contrast, English fines, known as thwaite, were paid according to the traditional Anglo-Saxon system of pounds and shillings. This difference in currency and terminology represented two distinct, parallel legal systems operating on the same island.
And this specific legal distinction was remarkably consistent. It was recognized by successive Anglo-Saxon kings, including Edgar and Ethelred.
It was. And this legal partitioning persisted well into the High Medieval period. The laws promulgated by Henry I from 1100 to 1135 explicitly recognized England as being divided into three distinct legal provinces: Wessex, Mercia, and the province of the Danes, or Denelaga.
So the law itself confirmed that the Danish legal framework was considered co-equal with the Saxon ones for generations.
Yes. And a further indication of this is the sheer volume of Scandinavian juridical terms that infiltrated the common law of England.
Terms that survive into modern English, like bylaw and husting, are direct Scandinavian borrowings.
Exactly. But even in specialized, now obsolete legal terminology, we find terms like name for the seizure of goods, or heimelborch for surety. These terms demonstrate that Danish legal concepts and procedures were adopted wholesale into the English judicial lexicon.
And beyond terminology, the very nature of land tenure and the composition of the peasantry in the Danelag reveal a distinctly Scandinavian social structure.
A structure that sharply contrasted with the Anglo-Saxon South. A special class of Danish chiefs, known as holdas or utilers, held properties by what is described as perfectly free tenure.
So free tenure meaning holding property without any inherent service obligation or dependence on a superior lord.
Precisely. They were independent, allodial landowners, an almost revolutionary concept compared to the increasingly dependent land ownership in the South. The Scandinavian term for peasant, bonde, was also widely disseminated in the North, suggesting that the peasantry itself constituted a substantial part of the landed proprietary.
So many northern peasants, though they might pay rent, were not bound serfs. Their holdings were typically inherited by their sons, ensuring a form of semi-independent, secure ownership.
And Domesday Book, compiled 20 years after the Norman conquest, provides the crucial census data that confirms this. The document lists two classes of independent landowners, soetermani and liberi homines, as overwhelmingly numerous in the Danish districts.
And the numbers are staggering. Lincolnshire, the old Danish heartland, had over 11,000 soetermani. East Anglia had nearly 13,000 liberi homines.
Compare that with the southern, predominantly Saxon counties. Buckinghamshire, for instance, had only 19 soetermani. This data indicates that the Scandinavian settlers established a huge, numerically dominant class of independent peasantry, a social structure that endowed the region with a unique and enduring political character.
Beyond land tenure, the administrative divisions of the Danelag were uniquely Scandinavian, focusing on communal assemblies for justice.
Right. Disputes were settled at things, following the Scandinavian custom of open assembly. The village of Thingwall in Cheshire shares its name with the chief thing place in Iceland.
More familiar to us today are the writings of Yorkshire,
Or Thrithings. This division of Yorkshire and historically Lincolnshire into North, East, and West writings originates from the Scandinavian Tredingir, meaning thirds. This was a judicial division entirely foreign to the Anglo-Saxons.
Another enduring administrative designation is wapentake.
Or Vabentag. This term is still used for a district in northern counties, replacing the Anglo-Saxon hundred. The name likely stems from the Danish custom of signifying assent, or electing chiefs at the things by the clang of arms.
And finally, even in urban settings, Danish influence is clear. The English word bylaw is a pure Danish term by love.
It is. This confirms that the Scandinavians exercised significant influence on city judicature and local governance. Furthermore, Scandinavian hustings existed in key cities, including London and York, long associated with England's freest institutions.
We transition now to two pivotal judicial institutions that fundamentally define English common law: the jury system and trial by battle. Both have demonstrably deep Scandinavian roots.
We could start with trial by battle.
Yeah.
In the heathen Scandinavian North, severe legal disputes could be settled by a ritualistic duel known as holmgang. This combat typically took place on a small island, a holm.
It was a martial form of proof, an alternative to the Christian ordeal by hot iron.
Precisely. The Danes, and subsequently the Normans, introduced holmgang into the Danelag. The Normans then generalized this across all of England as trial by battle, and the historical persistence of this is remarkable. It wasn't formally abolished until 1818.
But the more enduring and significant contribution to modern legal systems is, of course, the jury. The institution of the jury system originated in the Scandinavian North, where it was known as nafn or nevninger.
Yes. In this system, A set number of jurors, typically chosen from landed proprietors, were selected to hear evidence and pronounce guilt or innocence before the formal judgment was delivered.
Now, the question of whether the jury is Anglo-Saxon or Scandinavian in origin has been fiercely debated, but the documentary evidence seems quite instructive.
It is. The earliest positive and specific traces of a formalized jury system in England are found exclusively in the Danelagh, predating the Norman conquest by over a century.
And the argument relies on specific clauses found within Ethelred's Law for the Five Burghs, a document tailored for the Danish areas of the East Midlands.
Right. This law mandates a very precise procedure for justice. It states that in every wapentake thing, 12 senior thanes go out, and the reeve with them and swear on the relic, confirming that they will accurately accuse no innocent man, nor conceal the guilty.
This is a foundational step in the grand jury concept, an oath-sworn body of local, powerful men.
And crucially, the law specifies the mechanism for consensus. The verdict stands if 8 of these 12 agree. This establishment of a specific defined majority rule is a feature of Scandinavian jurisprudence.
And to confirm the application of this law solely to the Danish population, we look at the financial penalties stipulated within the document itself.
Exactly. The fines cited in this very law are reckoned strictly in Danish marks and ore, not Anglo-Saxon pounds and shillings. Furthermore, Danish legal terms like lock-up are used within the text. This triple confirmation places the earliest formalized jury firmly within the Danelagh structure.
On top of that, we have the existence of the 12th lawman, or logimony, the lawman.
Right. And the Domesday Book provides definitive proof of their geographical confinement. It only mentions Lagimani in the Danish portion of North England, Cambridge, Lincoln, Chester, and Stamford. They are entirely absent from the rest of the kingdom.
So they were not an Anglo-Saxon institution generalized by the Danes, but a specifically Danish one, serving as regular jurymen.
Yes, these lagmen were fixed, established jurymen, always 12 in number, who were thanes or of equivalent rank. Importantly, they often succeeded their fathers in the role.
This specific aristocratic form of the jury makes sense as a political consequence of the Danes entering as conquerors. They wouldn't permit the conquered Anglo-Saxons to participate in verdicts affecting their community.
So the jury, in its earliest English form, was an aristocratic tool to manage justice for the dominant Danish population. And this pre-conquest Scandinavian jury structure provided a strong and familiar foundation when the Normans arrived.
The Normans, being of Norse descent themselves, were partial to the Danish laws already strongly entrenched in half the kingdom.
They were. A critical law, in 1164, under King Henry II, formally substituted a jury of 12 knights for the duel, utilizing the number and concept already proven successful in the Danelagh.
So the Normans did not invent the jury in England. They merely spread an institution that had long been confined and perfected in the Danelagh across the entire kingdom.
And that institution, justly celebrated as the central point of the country's judicial system, is therefore a massive and profound Scandinavian contribution to English freedom and governance.
Our final section delves into the enduring cultural and political legacy of the Scandinavian settlers, the inherent spirit of freedom that defined their political actions and ultimately stamped the character of a large part of the English population.
The historical evidence draws a very sharp contrast between the vigor of the Danish chiefs and the condition of the Anglo-Saxon nobility under Ethelred, which the research describes as characterized by political division, military ineptitude, and a lack of unity.
The Danes, conversely, possessed an inherent high spirit and a fierce love of freedom.
Right. The early settlements of Iceland serve as the primary historical analog. Those who emigrated from the Scandinavian north were often descendants of powerful free men, seeking new territories when their hereditary rights and liberties were threatened by ambitious monarchs back home.
They undertook the conquest of foreign lands not just for plunder, but to acquire or maintain that prized independence.
And this commitment to self-governance informed their entire political outlook in England. This vigorous spirit translated directly into prolonged resistance against Norman oppression. William the Conqueror's true goal was the systematic abolition of free tenure and the establishment of stringent feudalism,
which threatened the core foundation of the settlers' cherished freedom.
Exactly. The inhabitants of the old Danish districts, particularly Northumbria, distinguished themselves by maintaining a fierce and robust feeling of independence. This was evident even before the Norman invasion, when Tost Godwinson attempted to impose despotic rule after 1055.
The Northumbrians unanimously rejected him in 1064, articulating their resistance in clear terms that have been preserved by history.
Yes, we were born and bred up in freedom. A proud and ambitious chief we will not endure. For we have learnt from our fathers either to live like free men or to die.
That is a powerful statement of political principle. It demonstrates that the ideal of the independent free landholder was their defining cultural characteristic.
It was. And this determined independent spirit led the Danish-Norwegian descendants to set aside ancient grudges and ally with the Anglo-Saxons against William the Conqueror. The North remained the center of the fiercest resistance against the imposition of Norman feudal law.
The subsequent retaliation by William, the harrying of the North, involved severe devastation across Northumbria.
It did. But this only drove the resistance underground. The forests of North England became the refuge for outlaws who refused to submit to the conqueror. And these figures often bore recognizable Scandinavian names like Sweyn and Sihtric.
This cultural retention of martial and independent traits is highlighted in popular stories. The famous legend of William of Cloudsley, where an archer shoots an apple from his son's head, closely parallels the Scandinavian legend of Pontotoc.
It does. It shows the persistence of inherited cultural traits, ideas, and narratives long after the political wars had subsided.
Ultimately, the Scandinavian spirit left a lasting stamp throughout England. Qualities such as boldness in maritime adventures, perseverance, and a proud feeling of personal freedom are attributed in large part to the descendants of these Danish and Norwegian warriors.
To this day, a perceptible difference persists between the political and social character of the Southern English and the Northern English. The Northern English, particularly Yorkshiremen, are known for determination and independence traits historically associated with the Scandinavian colonists.
This political intelligence and ingrained love of freedom is still recognized in the modern political landscape. Public figures view representing northern districts in Parliament as an honor due to the politically engaged and independent character of the voters there.
And we can conclude by circling back to an earlier point that synthesizes this enduring legacy. Even today, the term husting, the place where candidates address electors, remains a pure Danish name, inextricably associated with England's freest democratic institutions.
An interesting question for you to consider is this. If the Normans had not subsequently generalized the jury system across the whole island, would the democratic spirit of the Danelag, confined to the north and east, have eventually faded out? Or would it have led to a permanent, legally divided nation along that same historical fault line?
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available on this channel. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.
While this is an AI recording, the research that has gone into this production is comprehensive and focuses on very specific moments in history, designed to bring as much detail to the listener as possible. Thanks again for listening in.